The city of New York didn't care about Valentine's Day, or at least that's what Elias Thorne told himself as he stared out from his sprawling penthouse in Tribeca. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of a city vibrating with a forced, commercialized warmth. Below, the red and pink neon lights of Manhattan blurred into a dizzying smear of manufactured affection, a kaleidoscope of roses and expensive dinners that felt like an insult to his solitude. But Elias wasn't looking at the skyline or the restless river of yellow taxis. He was looking at a letter, yellowed at the edges and smelling faintly of a memory he couldn't quite bury. It was dated exactly 5 years ago, delivered on a morning when the world had felt full of light. It contained only one sentence, written in a delicate, hurried script: "Meet me where the world ends and our story begins, on the day when hearts are supposedly whole." Elias was a man built on the principles of logic and cold steel. As a high-end architectural restorer, his entire professional life was dedicated to fixing broken things, shored-up foundations, cracked marble, and decaying facades. Yet, his own heart had been a structural ruin, a hollowed-out shell since Clara Vance disappeared. Clara, a woman who tasted like rain and spoke in shifting metaphors, had been more than a lover, she was the architect of his joy. And then, on February 14, 5 years prior, she had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only that cryptic note on his pillow and a single silver earring shaped like a crescent moon. There were no ransom calls, no sightings, and no closure. Just a silence so heavy it threatened to collapse the ceiling of his reality. The hook that pulled him out of his self-imposed exile tonight wasn't just the anniversary or the old letter. It was the fact that at precisely 11 p.m., for the first time in 60 agonizing months, his phone had buzzed with a text from an unlisted, encrypted number. It wasn't a message of words, but a set of GPS coordinates pointing directly to the center of the Bethesda Terrace in Central Park. The timestamp for the meeting was set for midnight. The sender's ID. A single, solitary letter that made his blood turn to liquid nitrogen in his veins. He knew it was likely a cruel joke. A digital scam played by someone who knew his history, or perhaps a lingering ghost of his own imagination finally manifesting in the wires. Yet, the drama of his soul, the part of him that still breathed for her, demanded he go. Logic argued that a trap awaited, but love argued that a miracle might be possible. He grabbed his heavy charcoal overcoat, the one she used to say made him look like a brooding hero from a 1940s noir film, and stepped out into the biting, freezing February air. The wind howled through the steel canyons of Manhattan, echoing between the skyscrapers like a choir of voices whispering her name. As he walked toward the park, the memories began to flood back with a violent clarity. He remembered their last night together, the vintage champagne that had felt like liquid gold, the laughter that had filled their small apartment, and then the sudden, jarring, and absolute silence when he woke up to an empty bed and a cold room. He had spent half a decade and a small fortune investigating her disappearance, uncovering whispers of a dark Vance family secret that Clara had been desperately running from, a lineage of immense wealth, political coercion, and shadow dealings that stretched back to the old money of Newport. Was she back because the danger had passed, or because the shadows had finally cornered her? As Elias reached the stone entrance of Central Park, the sky opened up, and snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes, veiling the city in a ghostly white shroud. The park was eerie at this hour, a skeletal landscape of oak trees clawing at the indigo sky. Every shadow cast by a street lamp looked like a figure in a trench coat, every rustle of a stray plastic bag sounded like a footstep on the gravel. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, rhythmic drumming that felt louder than the city's distant hum. He reached the grand fountain, the angel of the waters standing silent and frozen in time. And there, standing by the rim of the basin, was a figure. A woman. She wore a long coat and a crimson scarf that bled a sharp, vibrant color into the monochrome night. She didn't turn around, but she spoke, her voice cutting through the freezing wind like a violin string snapping in the dark. "You're late, Elias. You always were better at fixing the remnants of the past than arriving in the urgency of the present." Elias stopped dead, his boots crunching on the fresh layer of snow. The voice was unmistakably hers, but it carried a new weight, it was deeper, weathered by seasons of hardship he hadn't shared, layered with a weariness that made his chest ache. Clara, he whispered, the name feeling like shards of glass in his throat. He had said it 1,000 times into the darkness of his room, but hearing it met with a physical presence was overwhelming. She turned slowly, the fabric of her coat rustling. The moonlight, filtered through the falling snow, hit her face, and for a long moment, Elias forgot the basic mechanics of breathing. It was her, but the soft, radiant girl he had known had been replaced by a woman with sharp, elegant edges. She looked like someone who had survived a war and won, though at a great cost. A faint, silver scar ran along her jawline, a jagged mark that hadn't been there before. Her eyes, once bright with whimsy, were now guarded and sharp, like polished flint. "Don't come any closer," she said sharply, her hand resting deep inside her coat pocket. The drama of the moment was suffocating, the air between them thick with unspoken years. "I didn't call you here for a romantic montage, Elias. I didn't come back for a Valentine's miracle. I called you here to tell you to stop looking. My father's men are still out there, and they are still watching you. Every time you hire a new investigator or dig into the Vance estate's offshore accounts, you put a fresh target on your own back. You're a restorer, Elias. You should know when a structure is beyond saving." Elias felt a surge of hot, indignant anger burn through his shock. 5 years, Clara. 5 years of silence. I spent every waking hour thinking you were dead, or worse, suffering. I went to the police, I hired every PI from here to London, I sat in our old apartment until the landlord finally evicted me because I couldn't stop smelling your perfume in the air. You don't get to reappear like a specter in the snow and tell me to just stop looking, as if I'm some stranger. Clara stepped toward him, the distance between them shrinking, and as she moved, the cold seemed to intensify, as if she were carrying the winter with her. You think I wanted to leave you? My father threatened to destroy everything you built. He was going to frame you for the embezzlement scandal at the restoration firm. He had the documents, the witnesses, the judges, all bought and paid for. He would have erased your name and your life. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I traded my freedom for your safety. I walked into the dark so you could stay in the light. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. The Vance family wasn't just old money, they were a predatory dynasty built on the systematic crushing of smaller, honest souls. Clara had been the captive princess of a glass empire, held hostage by her own bloodline to ensure his survival. They stood there, two tragic figures under the shadow of the Bethesda arches, surrounded by the ghosts of the people they used to be. The silence that followed her confession was deafening, broken only by the distant siren of an ambulance. I don't care about the firm, and I never cared about the name, Elias roared, his breath blooming in a white cloud. I cared about you. We could have run. We could have vanished together. Run where? Clara challenged, her eyes finally shimmering with unshed tears. They own the ports, the banks, the very ground you're standing on. For 5 years, I've been living in a tiny cabin in the mountains of Vermont, Elias. A ghost among the pines, living under a name that isn't mine, waiting for the day they'd finally stop looking for me. But today, the world changed. My father died this morning. The news hung in the air like a heavy curtain. The tyrant was gone, and the chains were technically broken, but the psychological weight of 5 years of isolation remained. This wasn't a happy reunion, it was an autopsy of a stolen life. Elias reached out, his fingers trembling with a mix of fear and longing, and finally touched her cheek. Her skin was like ice. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned into his palm, a single sob finally breaking through her stoic, battle-hardened mask. I missed you every second, she whispered, her voice cracking into a million pieces. I used to write your name in the frost on my windows every morning just to prove to myself that you were real, and that I hadn't imagined our life together. The fragile moment of tenderness was shattered by the harsh, blinding glare of headlights. A black SUV with tinted windows barreled down the pedestrian path, its tires screeching and kicking up slushy snow. The engine roared, a predatory sound that cut through the serenity of the park. "They're here," Clara gasped, her face turning a deathly shade of pale. "Even with him dead, the machine is still running. His lawyers, his security team, they know I have the documents I took from his private safe. They won't let me be the heir, and they won't let me expose the truth. They'd rather bury us both in this park than lose control of the Vance legacy." "Get in the car." "No, follow me," Elias commanded, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward a narrow stone staircase. He didn't have a vehicle nearby, but he had spent years studying the architectural blueprints of the city, and he knew the park's hidden topography better than anyone. They sprinted toward the 72nd Street exit, their lungs burning as the frigid air tore at their throats. This was the raw drama of New York, a city that could be a playground for lovers in the afternoon and a lethal labyrinth for the hunted at night. They ducked into the shadows of a subway entrance, the sudden heat of the underground rising up to meet them like a humid, metallic breath. They hopped the turnstile in a blur of motion, Elias's hand never letting go of hers. He felt the pulse in her wrist, wild, erratic, and beautiful. They boarded a southbound Q train just as the heavy doors hissed shut, leaving two men in dark suits standing on the platform, their faces grim and anonymous as the train began to move. As the train rattled and hummed through the dark, graffiti-streaked tunnels, Elias and Clara sat in the corner of a nearly empty car. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead gave the scene an ethereal, cinematic quality, casting long shadows across their faces. The air in the car smelled of ozone and damp wool. "What documents, Clara? What is so important that they are still chasing you through a blizzard?" Elias asked, his voice low and urgent. "Proof that the entire Vance fortune was built on a series of illegal land grabs and corporate sabotage in the early 90s. If I release them, the estate is liquidated. The foundation of their power is gone. But they'd rather kill me than see that happen. They want the status quo to remain." She looked at him, her eyes fierce and unwavering. "I'm not the girl who ran away in the night anymore, Elias. I'm the woman who is going to burn their empire to the ground, even if I have to stand in the middle of the flames." Elias looked at her and felt a new kind of love, a fierce, protective, and deeply admiring fire. They weren't just two people on a tragic date, they were partners in a heist against destiny itself. He realized that this Valentine's Day wouldn't be about chocolate and roses, it would be about the grit of survival and the reclaiming of a stolen future. They got off at Times Square, the chaotic, neon heart of the world. Amidst the throngs of tourists and the giant screens advertising things no one needed, they were momentarily invisible. Elias led her through a side exit and into a small, nondescript boutique hotel in the theater district where he kept a permanent room for late-night work projects. As they entered the elevator, the reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror showed them as they truly were, disheveled, frantic, terrified, but for the first time in 5 years, undeniably together. Inside the hotel room, the roar of the city finally faded to a dull, distant hum. Elias locked the door, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned his forehead against the wood for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. The room was warm and dimly lit, scented with sandalwood, and the comforting smell of old paper from the architectural sketches spread across the desk. Clara collapsed onto the edge of the bed, the adrenaline leaving her body in a sudden, exhausting wave that left her trembling. Elias knelt before her, as he had done 100 times in his dreams, and began to unlace her heavy, snow-encrusted boots. It was an act of quiet service, a silent apology for all the years they had lost to the shadows. "We're safe here for tonight," he said softly. "The room is registered under a shell company I use for restoration contracts. No one knows I have this space." Clara watched him, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his face. "You look older, Elias," she remarked, her voice a gentle caress. "There are gray hairs at your temples that weren't there before." "That's from 5 years of wondering if I'd ever see you again," he replied, looking up at her with raw honesty. "Every gray hair is a day I spent looking for your face in every crowd on the street." The drama of their long separation was a physical presence in the room, an invisible guest that sat between them. Clara reached out, her fingers grazing his hair, and pulled him up. Their lips found each other in a kiss that tasted of desperation, salt, and 5 years of starvation. It wasn't a gentle, romantic kiss, it was a collision of two souls trying to merge back into one. They tumbled back onto the pillows, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them like the atmosphere of a deep-sea trench. But as Elias moved to pull her closer, to bridge the gap that time had created, she pushed him back gently. Her expression turned somber. She sat up and, with a trembling hand, pulled her heavy wool sweater over her head. In the dim, amber light of the bedside lamp, Elias saw the true extent of the family secret. Her back, once smooth and flawless, was now a map of faint, jagged scars, white lines that told a story of discipline and cruelty. Her father had used his power to keep her in line long before she had the courage to flee. Elias felt a murderous, cold rage toward a man who was already dead. He leaned forward and began to kiss each scar, his lips a soothing, silent balm against her damaged skin. "I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure no one ever touches you like that again," he vowed into the silence of the room. "The restoration starts now, Clara. Not for a building, but for us." They spent the remainder of the night talking, not sleeping. She told him about the crushing loneliness of the Vermont winters, the way she had learned to chop wood and hunt just to survive, and the way she'd followed his rising career through old architectural magazines she found in a town 3 miles from her cabin. He told her about the hollow victory of his professional success, how every historic building he restored felt like a tomb because she wasn't there to walk through the finished halls with him. As the sun began to rise over the jagged Manhattan skyline, painting the skyscrapers in hues of bruised purple, deep orange, and gold, they realized they were at a final crossroads. They could take the documents to the authorities and spend the next decade of their lives in courtrooms, or they could find a way to disappear together. "I don't want the Vance money, Elias," Clara said, her gaze fixed on the rising sun. "I don't want the fame or the revenge. I want the life we were supposed to have before they broke it. I want a quiet Tuesday where nothing happens. I want a Valentine's Day where the only drama is a burnt dinner and a movie we've already seen a dozen times." By 10 a.m. on February 14, the city was in full, frantic bloom with commercial romance. Florists were sold out of long-stemmed roses, and the air in Midtown was thick with the scent of overpriced perfume and the anxiety of suitors. But for Elias and Clara, the day was about a final, lethal reckoning. They weren't looking for a table for two, they were looking for a way out of the trap. They walked toward the Chelsea Piers, the wind coming off the Hudson River feeling like a serrated blade against their skin. Clara carried a small, weathered leather satchel containing the original Vance files, the evidence that could bring down a billion-dollar empire. The black SUV had found them again, in a city with 8 million cameras and a Vance on every corporate board, it had been an inevitability. 2 more cars were now idling at the entrance to the pier, their engines humming like hungry predators waiting for the signal to strike. "Just give us the bag, Clara," one of the men said, stepping out of the lead vehicle. It was her cousin, Marcus, a man who had always been a shark in a 3-piece suit, the heir apparent to the Vance cruelty. "You can walk away from this with a monthly stipend that will keep you in luxury for the rest of your life. You can go back to your woods and live in peace. Just don't destroy the family. Don't be the one to pull the thread that unravels everything we've built." Clara looked at Elias. He nodded almost imperceptibly, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. He had spent the morning making calls. He had a plan, one that involved an old friend in the Coast Guard and a private boat currently waiting at the very end of the long, narrow dock. "The family destroyed me a long time ago, Marcus," Clara said, her voice steady and echoing over the sound of the churning water. She didn't hand him the bag. Instead, she did something no one expected. She walked to the very edge of the pier, where the dark, icy waters of the Hudson River swirled violently below. "If I jump, these files go with me into the dark," she shouted over the rising wind. "And I've already set an encrypted email to trigger at noon. If I don't check in with a specific code, the digital copies go directly to the New York Times, the FBI, and the SEC. You have exactly 2 hours to call off your dogs, freeze the private investigators, and let us disappear. Or you can have the files back from the bottom of the river, and you can watch the Vance name become a footnote in a federal crime report by tomorrow morning. The drama was electric, a standoff played out on the edge of the world. Marcus looked at the churning water, then at the woman he had underestimated for a decade. He saw the fire in her eyes and realized he was beaten. The Vance empire was built on the foundation of secrets, and Clara had just turned on the floodlights. Go, Marcus spat, waving his hand in a gesture of disgusted surrender. But if I ever see your face in this city again, stipend or no stipend. You won't, Elias interrupted, stepping forward to shield her. Because from this moment on, Clara Vance doesn't exist. And neither does Elias Thorne. We are leaving the ruins behind. They didn't wait for a response or a change of heart. They ran toward the end of the pier where the waiting boat, a small but sturdy trawler, was already untying its lines. As they climbed aboard, the engine roared to life with a cloud of gray smoke, and the gap between the pier and the boat began to widen. They watched the iconic skyline of Manhattan, the city of their birth, their love, and their greatest trauma, slowly recede into a haze of snow and distance. The boat cut through the Atlantic waves, heading north toward a small, isolated coastal town in Maine where Elias had purchased a cabin years ago under a pseudonym, a place no one in his professional life knew existed. The air was salt-crusted and biting, but for the first time in 5 years, it felt clean and full of possibility. It was now late evening on Valentine's Day. The moon was a silver coin tossed into the vast, dark sea, reflecting off the whitecaps. Elias and Clara stood at the railing of the boat, wrapped together in a single, heavy wool blanket to ward off the spray. The drama of the chase was finally over, replaced by the daunting, beautiful reality of a future that belonged only to them. We lost everything, Clara whispered, looking down at her empty hands. She had dropped the leather satchel into the Hudson at the very last moment before boarding, a final, symbolic act of letting go of her past. The money, the name, the career you built, it's all gone. No, Elias said, turning her to face him, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. We didn't lose everything. We just lost the weights that were dragging us down. We kept the only thing that ever mattered in that city. He reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He had bought it 3 years ago in a moment of desperate, foolish hope, and he had carried it with him every single day since then. He opened it to reveal a ring, not a traditional diamond, but a raw, uncut piece of emerald set in a band of recycled gold. It was imperfect, sturdy, and unique. I don't have a penthouse anymore, Clara, he said, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. I don't have a firm or a reputation. I just have a hammer, a saw, a cabin in the woods, and a heart that has finally stopped aching for the first time in 5 years. Clara Vance, or whoever you choose to be when we hit the shore tomorrow. Will you stay with me and build something new? Clara laughed, a sound that was more precious to him than all the Vance gold in the world. I've been staying with you in my head every single night for 5 years, Elias. It'll be nice to finally do it in person, without the ghosts. She slid the ring onto her finger, and they stood there as the boat moved steadily toward the dark horizon, 2 people who had been systematically broken by the world and then meticulously mended by each other. The hook of their story wasn't just the mystery of her disappearance, it was the realization that love isn't a final destination, it's the courage to keep sailing together when the storm hits the hardest. As the clock on the boat's dashboard finally struck midnight, marking the official end of Valentine's Day, they went below deck. The cabin of the boat was small, cramped, and warm. They didn't need the city's artificial lights or the expensive, manufactured romance of the holiday. They had the rhythmic, soothing sound of the waves against the hull and the steady, synchronized heartbeat of the person lying next to them. In the small town in Maine, they would soon be known only as Leo and Sarah. He would spend his days fixing the local docks and restoring old wooden boats, and she would spend hers writing stories about ghosts who finally find their way home. And every year on February 14th, they would walk down to the rocky shore, look toward the south, and thank the cold winter stars for the day the world ended and their real story finally, truly began. The story of Elias and Clara was no longer a tragedy written in the shadows. It was a masterpiece of restoration, a structure built to last a lifetime.
Subscribe, like, and tell people about this love.